It's an absolute pleasure to be joined next on Bright Green Live by Maggie Chapman. Maggie is a Scottish Green Party MSP and a former co-convener of the Scottish Green Party, also a long-time friend of Bright Green. And so it's absolutely brilliant to have Maggie joining us today. Maggie, how are you doing?
Not bad, thanks. Not bad, thanks. And you?
Yeah, doing okay. A little tired. We are 6 hours in, so
Yeah.
I'm on coffee number 6, but we're
Quite a
getting there.
marathon. Quite a marathon.
So we invited you on the show today to talk about the work that you're doing around late night shift workers.
Yeah.
And to kick us off, I just wondered if you could talk through a little bit, what are the big issues that are facing that group of workers right now?
Yeah, of course. And thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me on to talk about this particularly. I think it's an issue that cuts across so many different sectors and so many different people's lived experience. We know that people who finish work late or who have late night shifts, getting home for them safely can be a worry. We know that in many places public transport stops much earlier than is needed. If pubs and clubs are open till 11, 12 at night, even 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, there is no public transport that many workers can use to get home. So this is about putting into licensing provisions for the hospitality sector, particularly the provision that they need to provide safe transport home for their workers. And it comes off the back of a very bad incident that happened to a young hospitality worker in Scotland, who is also a Unite Hospitality member. She was asked to stay late, finish a shift at 1 a.m. Normally she would finish before 12. Her last bus home was 12:30. And when she was asked to stay late, her manager said that yes, that was fine. They would provide a taxi home for her. At midnight, her manager then said to her, actually, no, you can leave now. We know your last bus is 12:30, and that means we won't provide a taxi. The bus, for whatever reason, didn't materialize, didn't turn up, and so she was assaulted on her way home. And we know that this isn't an isolated incident. We know that lots of people, especially young women in the hospitality industry, face sexual abuse in the workplace, from clients, from customers. We know that many just don't feel safe leaving work at that time of night. So this allows the campaign that Unite Hospitality kicked off for months ago, over a year ago now, is to focus on their hospitality workers. But we know this is actually a much broader problem. We know that because of the lack of affordable public transport, because of the lack of accessible public transport at night, in the early hours of the morning, many workers don't feel safe or cannot use public transport to get to or from work. So one of the things that I'm quite clear, I want to bring forward a members' bill in the Scottish Parliament to change our licensing laws to make it a requirement that late night licensed premises have to provide a safe transport home for their workers. But what I'm hoping that this will do is actually kickstart a much wider conversation around provision of safe and accessible public transport, around the affordability of that transport, but also encouraging other workers, because we know other employers, because we know it's not only workers in the hospitality sector that face this. So that's kind of the context for this issue, where it comes from, and what we're hoping to do in Scotland. It's a small step, and I appreciate that it's only on one sector at the moment, but I'm hoping it'll catalyse a much wider discussion.
That's really helpful context to kind of lay out why the work that you're doing in this area is so important. And obviously you've mentioned there that you're planning on bringing forward a members' bill to the Scottish Parliament to address this. You've touched on some of the details of it there, but I wondered if you could talk us through what that bill will hopefully do in practice to address this issue.
Yeah, of course. No, so one of the reasons why it will be quite a focused piece of legislation is because there are obviously certain limits to the competencies and the powers that the Scottish Parliament has within the devolved settlement from Westminster. But one of the areas of legislation that is devolved to the Scottish Parliament is that around licensing. So the licensing legislation that we currently have, I'm hoping my bill will do is amend that to make it a requirement, as I said, a requirement for the hospitality industry in order to get late night licenses. If they have a liquor license for 11 p.m. or later, that they will have to provide safe transport home. So it's and free for their workers. So that's quite a specific and narrow, you could argue, proposal for the bill, but that's because that's one of the limits of the devolution settlement that we have. We can't regulate in other areas of employment law. Unfortunately, employment law is not devolved to the Scottish Parliament yet. So we have to use what are within our competencies, and licensing legislation is one of those examples. Obviously, I don't have draft legislation yet. We're still in the very early stages of the process. I'm working closely with Unite Hospitality. This is their campaign, and I want to be the conduit for their campaign through the Scottish Parliament. So working with them and working with other stakeholders, we are putting together all the documentation we need for the initial consultation. I'd hoped to get that out this side of Christmas, but that's just not been feasible with everything else that's going on. So hopefully early in the new year, we will have a consultation that will run for at least 12 weeks that will seek the views of the initial proposal, that proposal around requiring liquor license holders to provide free and safe transport home for their workers. That consultation will be open to organizations, to companies, to businesses, to individuals, to everybody to respond to. We will then go through a process of analysis of all the consultation responses, and that will allow us to refine exactly what we want the legislation to say. So it's not a quick process. This is going to take some time, but I want the legislation that we do get to be as robust as possible. And that's why the engagement with Unite, engagement with other sectors is absolutely crucial. And we know there is will out there to make this happen. We saw just this week Glasgow City Council support a green motion to make for Glasgow City Council and the licenses they control at the moment to make sure that their licensees provide safe transport home for workers. I don't want such provision to be a postcode lottery. I don't think women's safety or any workers' safety should be based on where they live or where they work. So that's why putting it into national legislation will mean across Scotland it is a requirement for licence holders. So we're at the very start of the process. We want to make sure that we speak to workers, we engage Unite members and other union workers as well. Obviously, we will need to speak to the hospitality sector because they'll be carrying the expense of some of this. And we need to make sure that we also have the transport available. So it won't be a one-size-fits-all across Scotland. We're not saying that it will definitely be taxis, it'll definitely be minibuses. We're not saying that. We need to ensure that the legislation is as specific as it can be, but casts the net wide enough so we can deal with regional and geographic variations, because we know what works in Glasgow city centre won't necessarily work in rural Aberdeenshire, for instance.
It's really helpful in terms of setting out sort of the timeline of where this is going next. And also, you mentioned Glasgow there, which leads me on to another question that I wanted to put to you, really, which is, firstly, given that there's this timeline that for the bill to come forward, and the parliamentary process is not necessarily the most rapid of processes, what can local councils be doing in the meantime to make this a reality? And we also have another question from the chat, which is, I guess, related, which is, in this period, like where we're hoping this legislation will come forward and be passed, how can people put pressure on the bosses or owners of hospitality businesses to provide this themselves?
That's a great question, and I'll come to that. I think just broadly speaking, local authorities could at the moment require this of their businesses within their areas through their own licensing regulations. But we know that not all are likely to do so. So one of the really good things about the decision that was taken in Glasgow City Council just this week, and I know it's happening elsewhere in the UK as well, we're getting more and more local authorities to take this issue seriously. And I suppose that there are a couple of things. If people live in an area where they don't currently have this agreement in place, is to lobby, to campaign with their local Unite branches and Unite workers to get a councillor in their council to propose this legislation at a local level. Because I think one of the challenges for national legislation, I think we will see the question, is there a legal competence issue here for a national parliament to be regulating in this way? I think there is a way that we can deal with this, and there is a way we can negotiate what is a very fine line between licensing law and employment law. We don't want this bill to fall simply because Westminster says that they have an issue with the devolved nature of the legislation. So that's one issue that I will need to deal with, but that's an issue for me within the Scottish Parliament to deal with. Local campaigners, local councillors could get their councils to back the kind of motion that Glasgow passed this week, and I would urge all of those with connections to, or even not, phone up your local Unite branch and ask them what can you do? How can we build a social movement, build the support much more broadly? Unite Hospitality have run a phenomenal campaign on this over the last few months, and I think it's credit to them that we have got as many councils, as many local authorities to sign up to the campaign already. But we still have work to do. So get involved with your Unite Hospitality branches, get involved with local campaigning, contact local councillors. If you live in an area that is represented by Green councillors, get in touch with them. I know Glasgow Greens would be only too happy for the motion that they passed to be shared with other Green councillors across the country to make sure that actually we can galvanise and add to the already excellent campaign that Unite Hospitality is running. I hope that covers both questions.
Absolutely, definitely does. So I've got another question, which is around the timeline and the kind of politics of this. So obviously this is at very early stages in terms of getting the paper out to consultation and so on, but ultimately this will go to the Scottish Parliament and will be voted on. Do you have a sense of what the response this is likely to be from the other political groups within the Scottish Parliament? I guess the SNP being quite key to this, but also Labour, the Lib Dems and the Tories as well.
Yeah, so because of the agreement, the cooperation agreement, the Butte House agreement that the Scottish Greens have with the Scottish Government, that relationship will be key. So my relationship with SNP government ministers is going to be one of the important relationships for me to develop, to have discussions with the Minister for Business and Enterprise. So I've already started those discussions, and I think there is a definite willingness to have, to see how we can make this work. I don't think there's going to be any political blocking to this happening. What like I said, the challenge I think we will have in Parliament is navigating that very fine line of devolved competence between employment law and licensing law. And that's what we need to get absolutely right, because I don't want us to be in a position where we get legislation that the Scottish Parliament passes, but then gets held up in legal wrangles with the UK government over competence. So I think I think there probably will be broad support. Maybe not all of the 5 parties in the Scottish Parliament will support this legislation. I doubt very much that Conservatives will see this as something that fits with their ideals. But I think I am confident that if we get the legislation right, it will get broad cross-party, maybe not all party, but certainly cross-party support.